what's interesting is research is indicating that when students have an authentic, particularly a worldwide authentic audience, the motivation goes right up. So instead of just handing their work into a lecturer, they're handing their work into planet Earth, and peers are judging them. And the motivation level seems to increase markedly. So iTunes U looks something like this. A couple of weeks ago, it looked something like this. Since a year ago, we've had some Asian institutions join in, and we've had a couple of Mexican institutions join in. If we look at the top downloads on iTunes U for planet Earth, I think it's lovely to note that number 4 a couple of weeks ago was the Intensive English video podcast, a podcast from SIT. It's a nice little video. It has some classroom stuff, and it has some role play, which is all good fun, and it's hugely popular. In fact, for over 6 months in the last 12 months, they were the top download on planet Earth. I'm illustrating this because a small outfit, good old Otago, have this huge profile. Now, I have a colleague who wanted to analyse the data, and Nick, who I notice is in the second row of the audience, sent us the log files for last November. This is the month of November. 400,000 subscriptions to this podcast in the month of November. Hugely popular stuff. But I'd always like to dig down a bit deeper, and we asked for the IP addresses, so the Internet Protocol addresses, the individual machines downloading these podcasts. And I had a colleague who was off ill, and I was a bit worried that he'd be bored at home. So I asked him to map those individual IP addresses to Google Earth. And let's have a look at where the downloads are actually happening. Now, as you'd expect, there are a pile in ANZ. There's downloads happening. If we spin around to Asia, 400,000 data points. That's a little bit jumpy. Piles happening in Japan, but of course there were internet issues in China, so not a lot back in November. It's opened up a bit. Let's go to Europe. So if we look at Europe, you'd expect that there's going to be piles of downloads in Germany, France. I noticed there's piles in Italy, Greece, Iberian Peninsula. Good to see some in North Africa as well. Oh, some in the Middle East too, that's great. But what I find really interesting is the tens of thousands of downloads that are happening in Ireland and the UK. Now, perhaps a social demographer might tell us that's something to do with all the Polish builders there. But where it actually gets more interesting to me, from a social anthropological perspective, is North America. Look at where the downloads are happening. Florida, Miami, California, East Coast. What's the obvious conclusion? There are piles of Latinos learning English from Otago. In fact, I have this image in my mind of 2 guys walking down the street of San Diego. Hola, Carlos, ¿cómo estás? Juan, Jesus. Hey, how do you study English? Of course, I learn English from Migo. I learned it from SIT. I'm very hungry. Why don't we go get some sausage chips?